The bathroom floor was covered in pale pink fabric, each torn piece representing another dream destroyed. Jasmine Washington stood frozen in the doorway, watching Trevor Lancaster and his crew laugh as they held up what remained of her grandmother's vintage prom dress, the one she'd spent 3 months altering by hand. But what happened in the next 12 hours would transform Westfield High's most vicious bully into someone who couldn't even make eye contact with the girl he'd tried to humiliate by sunrise. The entire school would learn exactly why you never mess with someone who has nothing left to lose. Jasmine had moved to Westfield, Connecticut, just 4 months earlier. When her mother landed a nursing job at the local hospital they'd left Detroit behind. Searching for a fresh start after her father's death left them drowning in medical bills. The suburban town felt like another planet: manicured lawns, luxury cars in the student parking lot, and kids who wore designer clothes to chemistry class. Jasmine's wardrobe consisted mainly of thrift store finds and hand-me-downs from her older cousin. But she'd never felt ashamed until she walked through Westfield High's pristine glass doors. She'd kept her head down, focusing on her studies and her part-time job at the local alteration shop. Mrs. Chen, the elderly owner, had taken Jasmine under her wing, teaching her advanced sewing techniques that transformed her natural talent into genuine skill. It was there, surrounded by bolts of fabric and the comforting hum of sewing machines, that Jasmine had discovered the dress, a 1950s ball gown in the softest pink, abandoned by a customer who never returned. Mrs. Chen had given it to her for free. Seeing how Jasmine's eyes lit up when she touched the delicate material, Trevor Lancaster ruled Westfield High like it was his personal kingdom. His father owned half the commercial real estate in town, and his mother sat on every important board from the country club to the school district. At 6'3", with the kind of casual confidence that comes from never hearing the word no, Trevor had perfected the art of cruelty disguised as charm. He didn't just bully, he orchestrated social destruction with the precision of a conductor leading a symphony. His crew consisted of 4 other seniors: Marcus Chen, whose parents owned the largest Asian fusion restaurant chain in the state; Bradley Hoffman, star quarterback with a full ride to Duke; Tyler Morrison, whose father was the town's mayor; and Jake Sullivan, who drove a different luxury car to school each week. Together, they formed an impenetrable wall of privilege that had never been challenged until they made the mistake of targeting the quiet girl from Detroit. The tension had been building for weeks. It started with small things: Trevor accidentally knocking Jasmine's books off her desk, Marcus making comments about her ghetto accent that she didn't actually have, Bradley asking loudly in the cafeteria if food stamps could buy prom tickets. Jasmine had endured it all with a grace that only seemed to infuriate them more. She never gave them the reaction they wanted, never let them see how their words stung. But prom was different. For the first time since arriving at Westfield, Jasmine had allowed herself to feel excited about something. She'd spent countless hours after her shifts at Mrs. Chen's shop working on the dress, taking it in at the waist, adding layers of tulle to modernize the skirt, hand-sewing tiny pearls along the neckline. It was her masterpiece, proof that she could create beauty even when surrounded by ugliness. She'd made the mistake of bringing it to school that Friday, planning to show her only friend, Aaliyah, during lunch. Aaliyah had begged to see it after hearing Jasmine describe it for weeks. They'd snuck into the empty chorus room, and Jasmine had carefully pulled the dress from its protective garment bag. Aaliyah's gasp of admiration made all those late nights worth it. "Girl, you look like an actual princess," Aaliyah had whispered, holding the dress up against Jasmine. "Where did you even find something this gorgeous?" Neither of them had noticed Tyler Morrison recording through the crack in the door. By 6th period, the video was everywhere. "Welfare Cinderella thinks she's going to prom," hand of to Devon. Read the caption on Trevor's Instagram story, complete with crying, laughing emojis. The comments were even worse. Jasmine had walked into her AP history class to find everyone staring at their phones, snickering behind their hands. She'd kept her head high, sliding into her seat and pulling out her textbook like her world wasn't crumbling. After school, she'd gone straight to her locker to retrieve the dress, planning to take it home where it would be safe. But her locker hung open, the lock cut clean through. Inside, instead of her beautiful creation, she found a note in Trevor's distinctive handwriting. "Check the third-floor bathroom if you want your rags back." Her hands had trembled as she climbed the stairs, each step heavier than the last. She could hear the laughter before she even reached the bathroom doormale voices, loud and cruel. She'd pushed open the door to find them there, Trevor holding her dress like it was contaminated, Marcus with scissors in his hand, Bradley recording everything on his phone. "Oh, look," Trevor had said, his green eyes glinting with malice. Cinderella came for her ball gown. He'd held the dress up, examining it with theatrical disgust. "You know what? I'm doing you a favor. Nobody wants to see you playing dress up, pretending you belong here." The first cut had been the worst. Marcus's scissors slicing through the bodice she'd spent 20 hours embellishing. The sound of tearing fabric filled the bathroom, each rip another piece of her grandmother's legacy destroyed. They'd laughed as they worked, tossing pieces of pink fabric like confetti, stomping on the delicate material with their designer sneakers. Jasmine had stood frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. It wasn't just a dress, they were destroying it, was her hope, her proof that she could make something beautiful in this cold, cruel place. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them that satisfaction. "Nothing to say?" Tyler had taunted, kicking a piece of tulle across the floor. "Come on. Where's that Detroit attitude? Aren't you people supposed to be tough?" The racial undertone hung in the air like poison. Jake had laughed nervously, glancing at the others to gauge if Tyler had gone too far. But Trevor just smiled, that cold, calculating smile that made him so dangerous. "She's not going to do anything," Trevor had said, dropping what remained of the dress barely more than shredded ribbon onto the bathroom floor. "She knows her place. Don't you, Jasmine?" They'd filed out, leaving her alone with the destruction. Bradley had paused at the door, and for a moment, she thought she saw something like guilt flash across his face. But then Trevor had called his name, and he'd left without a word. Jasmine had dropped to her knees, gathering the pieces with shaking hands. Each scrap of fabric felt like a piece of her heart. She'd stayed there until the janitor, Mr. Williams, had found her an hour later. The elderly man had helped her collect every piece, his own eyes misty, as she'd explained what had happened. "Some people," he'd said quietly, handing her a garbage bag for the remnants. "They can't stand to see beauty they didn't buy." She'd walked home in a daze, the bag clutched to her chest. Her mother wouldn't be home until 11 p.m. of their double shift to cover rent and groceries. Jasmine had spread the pieces across her bedroom floor, trying to see if anything could be salvaged. But they'd been thorough in their cruelty. Nothing larger than her palm remained intact. That's when something inside her had shifted. The tears finally came, but with them came something elsey, cold, determined fury. They thought she was weak because she was quiet. They thought she was defeated because she didn't fight back. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Jasmine had picked up her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found the number she needed. Malik Washington, her cousin from Detroit. The one who taught her that sometimes the best revenge isn't loud or violent. Sometimes it's precise, calculated, and devastating. "Jazzy?" Malik had answered on the second ring. "Everything okay? I need your help," she'd said, her voice steady despite the tears. "Remember what you told me about psychological warfare?" There had been a pause. Then Malik's voice had turned serious. "What happened?" She'd told him everything, the months of harassment, the destroyed dress, the video still circulating on social media. By the time she finished, she could practically feel Malik's anger through the phone. "You still got my old laptop?" he'd asked. "Yeah." "Good. Listen carefully. We're not going to touch them physically. That's what they expect. What they want. We're going to destroy them using their own weapons. You remember what I taught you about social engineering? Jasmine had smiled for the first time since finding her ruined dress. Every system has a weakness. That's my girl. Now, here's what you're going to do. The plan had started simply enough. Malik had walked her through creating anonymous accounts, teaching her how to use VPNs and encrypted messaging, but Jasmine had taken it further. Adding her own touches, she knew Trevor's weakness wasn't just his arrogance, it was his father's reputation. Mr. Lancaster had built his real estate empire on an image of family values and community service. What would happen if certain information came to light? Her part-time job at the alterations shop had given her access to something Trevor never could have anticipated. Mrs. Chen didn't just do alterations, she also did dry cleaning for half the wealthy families in Westfield, including the Lancasters, and Trevor, in his arrogance, often left things in his pockets. Notes, receipts, photos. Jasmine had never invaded anyone's privacy before, had never even considered it. But as she'd sat on her bedroom floor, surrounded by the ruins of her grandmother's dress, she'd remembered finding a particular photo that had fallen out of Trevor's blazer 2 weeks ago. A photo she'd quickly returned to the pocket, her face burning with secondhand embarrassment. At the time, she'd wanted to forget she'd ever seen it. Now, she wondered if Trevor even remembered it existed. She'd started with research, using the skills Malik had taught her to dig deeper into the Lancaster family's public image. What she found was a carefully constructed facade full of interesting cracks. Mr. Lancaster's company had a history of discriminatory hiring practice suits that had been settled quietly, complaints that had been buried. Mrs. Lancaster's charity work looked impressive until you realized how much money disappeared into administrative costs. But it was Trevor's digital footprint that provided the most ammunition. His Finsta account, which he thought was anonymous, was full of videos that would horrify his father's conservative business partners, the parties at their house when his parents were away, the property damage he and his friends caused for fun, the cruel pranks they'd pulled on other students. He documented his own downfall without realizing it. By midnight, Jasmine had everything she needed, but she wasn't going to release it all at once. That would be too obvious, too easy to dismiss as a bitter student's revenge. No, this required finesse. Malik had taught her that the best psychological warfare made the target paranoid, made them destroy themselves with their own fear. She'd started with something small, an anonymous email to Mr. Lancaster's biggest client, containing nothing but a single screenshot from one of Trevor's videos, the one where he and his friends were drunkenly joking about keeping the minorities in their place while standing in what was clearly the Lancasters' home office. No accusations, no demands, just the image and a promise that more would follow if certain behaviors didn't change. The effect had been immediate. Saturday morning, Jasmine had watched from her bedroom window as Mr. Lancaster's Mercedes screeched into their driveway at 8 a.m., 2 hours earlier than he ever returned from his weekend golf games. Even from across the street, she could hear the shouting, but that was just the appetizer. The main course came Saturday evening, timed perfectly for maximum impact. Westfield High's prom was famous for its live social media coverage, students posting constantly to Instagram and TikTok. The school's official accounts resharing the best moments. It was Trevor's favorite platform, where he held court with thousands of followers who hung on his every post. At exactly 8 p.m., as the prom was reaching its peak, something interesting began appearing in the comments of every prom-related post. Links to a website that looked professional, clean, almost corporate. The truth about Westfield's finest. Read the simple header. Below it, a countdown timer ticking toward midnight. Curiosity is a powerful thing. Within minutes, hundreds of students were clicking the link, desperate to know what scandal was about to break. The site was elegant in its simplicity, just the timer and a single line of text. Every kingdom falls. Every bully meets their match. Every secret comes to light. Trevor had been holding court on the dance floor when Marcus shoved a phone in his face. The color had drained from his skin. As he'd read the words, he'd immediately tried to call his father, but Mr. Lancaster wasn't answering. He was too busy in an emergency meeting with his business partners, trying to explain the email they'd all received. As the timer ticked down, the paranoia had spread through Trevor's crew like wildfire. What secrets? Whose secrets? They all had things they'd rather keep hidden, things they'd done under Trevor's influence that could destroy their futures. Bradley's full ride to Duke would evaporate if the recruitment board saw certain videos. Marcus's parents would ship him to military school if they knew about his side business selling test answers. Tyler's father's mayoral campaign would implode if his son's racist rants became public. Jake had been the first to crack. At 10:30 p.m., he'd cornered Trevor in the parking lot. "What did you do?" he demanded, his usual bravado replaced by naked fear. "This is about that girl, isn't it? The dress thing?" "Shut up," Trevor had snarled. But his own fear was showing. "It's just some stupid prank. Nobody has anything on us." But they both knew that wasn't true. They'd been careless, arrogant, documenting their cruelties like trophies. Any one of those videos, those photos, those messages could destroy everything their parents had built for them. By 11 p.m., the prom was in chaos. Half the students were huddled around phones, refreshing the mysterious website obsessively. The other half were whispering, speculating, some even taking bets on whose secrets would be revealed. The chaperones tried to restore order, but how do you fight an enemy you can't see? Trevor had left early, driving home in his Porsche with his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles went white. He'd burst into his father's study to find Mr. Lancaster on a conference call, his face purple with rage. "I don't care what it costs," his father had been saying. "Find out who sent that email and bury them." The timer hit 0 at exactly midnight. Trevor was refreshing the page frantically, his designer suit soaked with sweat. The countdown disappeared, replaced by a single video player. His finger had hovered over the play button, trembling, but when he'd finally pressed play, it wasn't what he'd expected. Instead of the damning footage he'd feared, the video showed something else entirely. It was security camera footage from the school, timestamp showing Friday afternoon, the third-floor bathroom. The destruction of the dress, captured in crystal-clear detail from the hallway camera everyone had forgotten existed. But that wasn't the devastating part. The devastating part was the audio enhanced and clarified. Every word they'd said echoed with perfect clarity. The racial slurs, the cruel laughter, Tyler's "you people" comment, and worst of all, Trevor's cold voice saying she knew her place. The video ended with a simple message: "This is just the beginning. Check your inbox." Trevor's phone had buzzed immediately. An email from an anonymous account containing screenshots of every incriminating post, every cruel message, every documented crime from the past 2 years. The subject line was simple: "Apologize publicly by dawn, or this goes viral." But it wasn't just Trevor who'd received an email. Marcus, Bradley, Tyler, and Jake had all gotten their own personalized messages, each containing their specific transgressions. The genius of it was that they couldn't coordinate their response. Each was too afraid of what the others might have done. What secrets might be revealed? As Saturday night bled into Sunday morning, the boys who'd ruled Westfield High through fear found themselves drowning in it. Parents were called, lawyers were consulted, tears were shed not of remorse, but of self-pity and terror. Meanwhile, Jasmine had spent her Saturday differently. After setting her plan in motion, she'd returned to Mrs. Chen's shop. The elderly woman had been waiting for her with a sad smile and a surprise garment bag hanging in the back room. "I heard what happened," Mrs. Chen had said simply. "This was my daughter's. She would want you to have it." Inside had been a dress that took Jasmine's breath away, not pink this time, but deep purple, the color of royalty and defiance. It was modern where her grandmother's dress had been vintage, bold where the other had been soft. It fit like it had been made for her. "How did you know my size?" Jasmine had asked. Tears streaming down her face. Mrs. Chen had winked. I've been watching you work for months. I know your measurements better than you do. Now go show them that they can't break you. As Sunday's first light began creeping across Westfield's manicured lawns, 5 phones buzzed simultaneously. 5 boys who'd gone without sleep stared at identical messages. Time's up! The Instagram post went live at 5:17 a.m. From an account called at Westfield Truth, the bathroom video played on loop, already racking up views and shares, but more interesting were the comments beginning to flood in students who'd been too afraid to speak up before, now emboldened to share their own stories of harassment and humiliation at the hands of Trevor and his crew. By 6 a.m., the post had been shared over 3,000 times. Local news outlets were picking it up. The school board's emergency phone line was ringing off the hook, and somewhere in her modest apartment, Jasmine Washington was sitting at her sewing machine, already working on her next creation. She'd thought about revenge for hours as she'd gathered up the pieces of her ruined dress, but Malik had been right. The best revenge wasn't destruction. It was revelation. It was holding up a mirror and forcing people to see their own ugliness. It was using their own weapons against them with surgical precision. Her phone had been buzzing all morning with messages of support, but she'd ignored them all except one. Aaliyah had texted at 6:30 a.m. Girl, Trevor just deactivated all his social media accounts, and someone said his dad pulled him out of school. Is this really happening? Jasmine had smiled, running her fingers over the purple fabric of her new dress. Just the beginning. She'd texted back, because the truth was, she could have destroyed them completely. She had enough dirt to bury their families, end their futures, turn them into social pariahs forever. But that would have made her just like them, cruel for the sake of cruelty, drunk on power. Instead, she'd given them a choice, the same choice they'd never given her or any of their victims. They could face the consequences of their actions, make real amends, and maybe learn something. Or they could watch their carefully constructed worlds crumble, one leaked video at a time. By 7 a.m., Westfield High's parking lot looked like a crime scene. News vans lined the street. Reporters eager for the story of wealthy bullies brought down by their own cruelty. Principal Davidson had arrived at 6:45 and 80 Dozer, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his phone permanently attached to his ear as he fielded calls from furious parents and concerned board members. Inside the Lancaster mansion, Trevor sat at the kitchen table, his head in his hands. His father paced behind him, alternating between screaming at lawyers on the phone and glaring at his son with undisguised disgust. Do you have any idea what you've cost me, mister? Lancaster had roared. The Pemberton deal is dead? $3.7 million. Gone because my son is a racist piece of garbage who got caught on camera. Trevor had tried to explain, to minimize, to shift blame. But the evidence was too damning, too clear. There was no spinning this, no buying his way out. For the first time in his life, his father's money and influence couldn't save him. His phone, sitting face up on the table, showed missed calls from everyone he knew. Some were from his crew, probably panicking about their own exposure. Others were from classmates he'd considered beneath him, likely calling to gloat. But the one that made his stomach turn was from Brittany Chen Marcus's younger sister, who'd transferred schools after Trevor had spread rumors about her last year. Her voicemail was simple. How does it feel? At the Morrison house, Tyler's father sat in his home office, watching his mayoral campaign dissolve in real time. His campaign manager had quit via text at 6:15 a.m. Shortly after the video went viral, the opposing candidate had already released a statement questioning how Mayor Morrison could lead a diverse community when he'd raised such a hateful son. I gave you everything, Mayor Morrison said quietly, not looking at Tyler. Private schools, tutors, every opportunity to become someone worthy of respect. And this is what you do with it? Tyler couldn't answer. His throat felt like it was closing up, the same sensation he'd caused in countless victims over the years. He thought about all the times he'd laughed at others' pain, never imagining he'd one day be drowning in his own. Bradley's house was silent, except for the sound of his mother crying in the master bedroom. His father had driven to Duke at 5:30 a.m., hoping to do damage control in person. The full scholarship that had been their family's pride was now hanging by a thread. The recruitment board had already issued a statement saying they were reviewing the situation with grave concern. Bradley sat on his bed, staring at his phone. He'd typed and deleted a dozen messages to Jasmine, each one more pathetic than the last. "I'm sorry," felt hollow. "I didn't mean it was a lie. Please make this stop," was selfish. In the end, he typed nothing, paralyzed by the realization that there were no magic words to undo cruelty. At Jake's penthouse, his parents held an emergency family meeting. His mother, a federal judge, looked at him like he was a stranger. "I've spent my career fighting for justice," she said, her voice eerily calm. "And my own son is a predator who destroys young women's dreams for entertainment." Jake wanted to protest that it wasn't like that it was just a prank, that everyone was overreacting. But the words died in his throat when he saw the tears in his mother's eyes. She'd seen the video, heard the laughter, watched him kick pieces of pink fabric like it was trash. There was no defense for that kind of cruelty. Marcus had locked himself in his room, ignoring his parents' demands to come out. His phone showed 17 missed calls from his father and 43 text messages from kids at school. Some were supportive, from other bullies who feared they'd be next, but most were from victims finally feeling brave enough to share their own stories about Marcus, the girl he'd mocked for her accent, the freshman he'd terrorized until they transferred, the scholarship student he'd humiliated for bringing lunch from home. Each message was another crack in the image he'd built of himself. He wasn't the cool guy everyone respected. He was the monster everyone feared. As Sunday morning progressed, Westfield High's social media exploded with confessions and revelations. The hashtag number Westfield Truth began trending locally, with students sharing stories of harassment they'd been too afraid to report. What started as Jasmine's revenge had become a reckoning for the entire school's toxic culture. Samantha Park posted about how Trevor had spread rumors about her after she'd rejected him sophomore year. Rumors that had followed her for 2 years. David Okonkwo shared screenshots of racist messages from Tyler that he'd saved but never reported, afraid of retaliation. Emma Rodriguez revealed how Bradley had groped her at a party and then threatened to ruin her if she told anyone. Each story added weight to the crushing realization spreading through certain living rooms in Westfield. The boys who'd thought themselves untouchable had left a trail of victims stretching back years. By 9 a.m., an emergency PTA meeting had been called. Parents who'd spent years turning a blind eye to their children's behavior were forced to confront the ugly truth. Mrs. Lancaster arrived late, her usually perfect makeup smudged, her designer dress wrinkled. She'd spent the morning on the phone with publicists, trying to salvage something from the wreckage of their reputation. Principal Davidson stood at the podium, his face grave. "We have failed our students," he began. "We've allowed a culture of intimidation and cruelty to flourish under the guise of teenage hijinks. That ends today." The meeting erupted into chaos. Some parents demanded the boys be expelled immediately. Others, friends of the families involved, tried to minimize the damage, calling it a misunderstanding or boys being boys. But the majority were horrified, both by what had been revealed and by their own complicity in ignoring the warning signs. Mrs. Chen attended the meeting, sitting quietly in the back row. When recognized, she stood with dignity. "I've cleaned your clothes for 20 years, she said, her accent thick, but her words clear. "I've seen the stains you try to hide blood." Tears. Shame. We all knew what was happening. We chose comfort over courage. That young woman, Jasmine, she showed more bravery than all of us combined. Her words hung in the air, undeniable in their truth. Meanwhile, Jasmine was at home, helping her mother understand what had happened. Denise Washington had returned from her night shift to find her daughter surrounded by news articles on her laptop, all featuring their family name. "Baby, what did you do?" her mother had asked, sinking onto the couch. Jasmine had explained everything: the months of harassment, the destroyed dress, the plan she'd executed with Malik's help. Her mother had listened in silence, her face cycling through anger, pride, fear, and finally, fierce protectiveness. "They could sue us," her mother said quietly. "These people have money? Lawyers. They could." Jasmine agreed. "But they won't. They'd have to admit everything in court. Discovery would reveal things that would destroy them completely. I made sure of that." Her mother studied her for a long moment. "You're stronger than I realized. I learned from you." Jasmine replied, "All those double shifts? Never complaining. Always pushing forward. You taught me that strength isn't about being loud. It's about enduring until you find the right moment to act." They were interrupted by a knock at the door. Jasmine opened it to find an unexpected visitor, Bradley Hoffman, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His usual cocky demeanor was gone, replaced by something raw and uncertain. "Can I talk to you?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Jasmine's mother stood protectively, but Jasmine held up a hand. "It's okay. Mom, we'll talk on the porch." They sat on the front steps, an awkward silence stretching between them. Finally, Bradley spoke. "I keep thinking about my little sister," he said. "She's 12. If someone did to her what we did to you—" He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve that. I just wanted you to know that I see it now. What we were. What I was." Jasmine studied him, looking for the angle, the manipulation, but all she saw was a boy finally confronting the monster he'd become. "What are you going to do about it?" she asked. "I don't know," he admitted. "Duke's probably gone. My parents can barely look at me, but maybe that's what I deserve. Maybe losing everything is the only way to start over as someone better." They sat in silence for a moment before Bradley stood to leave. At the sidewalk, he turned back. "The dress?" he said. "Your grandmother's dress? I know we can't fix that, but my mom's a buyer for Nordstrom. She has connections to vintage collectors. If you want, I could try to find something similar." Jasmine shook her head. "That dress can't be replaced? It was one of a kind, like my grandmother. But thank you for offering." As Bradley walked away, shoulders slumped with the weight of genuine remorse, Jasmine felt something she hadn't expected, a tiny spark of hope that people could change. By noon, the school board had called an emergency session. The evidence was too overwhelming to ignore. Trevor Lancaster, Tyler Morrison, Marcus Chen, and Jake Sullivan were expelled, effective immediately. Bradley Hoffman was suspended pending a full investigation of the assault allegations that had surfaced, but the board went further. A comprehensive review of the school's anti-bullying policies was ordered, mandatory training for all staff on recognizing and addressing harassment, a new reporting system that wouldn't rely on students finding the courage to speak up against those with power. As the news spread, Jasmine's phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. Her finger hesitated over the delete button until she read the preview. "This is Mrs. Lancaster." Against her better judgment, she opened it. "What you did to my family is unforgivable, but what my son did to you was monstrous. I've seen the other videos now, the ones he thought were hidden. I've seen what we created. I'm sorry. That's not enough. I know, but I needed you to know that at least one of us sees the truth." Jasmine stared at the message for a long time before typing back, "Seeing the truth is the first step. Acting on it is what matters." By 2 p.m., the story had gone national. Westfield Truth was trending across the country, sparking conversations about bullying, privilege, and the power of standing up to oppression. News outlets were calling Jasmine's story a masterclass in digital age justice and the revenge heard round the internet. But Jasmine wasn't interested in fame. She'd made her point. The boys who'd terrorized her and countless others had been exposed. their power stripped away by their own documented cruelty. The system that had protected them was being forced to change. That evening, she returned to Mrs. Chen's shop. The elderly woman greeted her with a warm smile and a cup of tea. "You've been busy," Mrs. Chen said with a knowing look. "I learned from the best." Jasmine replied, "You taught me that patience and precision can accomplish more than brute force ever could." They worked in comfortable silence for a while, Jasmine helping to organize new shipments of fabric. As the sun began to set, Mrs. Chen pulled out a wrapped package. "This arrived for you today," she said, her eyes twinkling. Inside was a bolt of the softest pink fabric Jasmine had ever touched, along with a note. "From the graduating class of 2021, we remember what they did to us too. Make something beautiful." Tears streamed down Jasmine's face as she realized what this meant. Other victims, students who'd graduated and moved on but never forgot the pain, had pooled their money to give her this gift. She wasn't alone. She'd never been alone. "What will you make?" Mrs. Chen asked gently. Jasmine fingered the fabric, her mind already spinning with possibilities. Something new. Something that honors the past but isn't defined by it. Something that shows them beauty can't be destroyed. It just transforms. As she worked, her phone lit up with notification after notification. Students from Westfield and beyond were sharing their own stories, finding courage in her example. Parents were having difficult conversations with their children about kindness and accountability. Teachers were reconsidering how they'd failed to protect vulnerable students. But perhaps the most significant change was in the halls of Westfield High itself. Monday morning arrived with a different energy. The invisible hierarchies that had defined social life for so long had crumbled. Students who'd lived in fear walked with their heads high. The culture of cruelty that had been dismissed as kids being kids was finally being recognized as the systemic abuse it had always been. Jasmine arrived at school wearing the purple dress Mrs. Chen had given her, her head high and her spirit unbroken. As she walked through the front doors, the hallway fell silent. Then, slowly, applause began. Not the mocking slow clap she'd endured before, but genuine appreciation from students who finally felt free. She made her way to her locker, where Aliyah was waiting with a huge grin. "Girl, you're a legend," Aliyah said, pulling her into a hug. "Do you know how many people you've helped? My little brother finally told my parents about the senior who's been taking his lunch money. 3 girls came forward about that creep Mr. Harrison. You started a revolution. I just wanted them to stop." Jasmine said quietly, "I just wanted to exist in peace. And now we all can." Aliyah replied, "Because you showed us how." The week progressed with surreal normalcy. Classes continued. Homework was assigned. Tests were taken, but underneath the routine, everything had changed. The fear that had permeated the school for years was gone, replaced by something new. Accountability. By Friday, as prom night finally arrived, Jasmine stood in front of her mirror wearing a new creation. She'd spent every evening that week working with the fabric from the anonymous donors, creating something that honored her grandmother's vintage aesthetic while incorporating her own modern style. The dress was pink, like the destroyed one, but stronger, bolder, with structured lines that spoke of resilience rather than softness. Her mother stood in the doorway, tears in her eyes. Your grandmother would be so proud, not just of the dress, but of the woman wearing it. The prom itself was subdued compared to previous years. The usual king and queen coronation had been replaced with recognition of students who'd shown exceptional courage and kindness when Jasmine's name was called. The standing ovation lasted for 3 full minutes. She stood on the stage, looking out at a sea of faces that had once ignored her suffering, and spoke from the heart. 2 weeks ago, 5 boys destroyed my grandmother's dress because they thought I didn't belong here. They were wrong, not because I've proven myself worthy of their approval, but because no one should have to prove their right to exist with dignity. We all belong. We all deserve respect. And we all have the power to stand up against cruelty, whether it's directed at us or at others. She paused, making eye contact with several students she knew had been victims. To those who've been hurt, your pain matters. Your stories matter. You matter. And to those who've done the hurting, it's never too late to choose differently. Real strength isn't about tearing others down. It's about having the courage to lift them up. As she left the stage, Jasmine caught sight of a familiar figure by the exit. Bradley Hoffman stood in a regular suit, not the designer one he'd planned to wear. He nodded to her once, then slipped out into the night. She'd heard he was volunteering at a local youth center now, trying to be the role model he'd never had. The dance continued, but Jasmine found herself outside on the terrace, needing a moment of quiet. She was surprised to find she wasn't alone. A freshman girl stood by the railing, tears streaming down her face. "Are you okay?" Jasmine asked gently. The girl looked up, startled. "You're her. You're Jasmine. You're the one who stood up to them. What's wrong?" The girl hesitated, then pulled out her phone, showing Jasmine a series of cruel messages from a group of junior girls. "It started last week. They say I'm too fat to be in drama club, that I'll ruin the spring musical B-Dow. I don't know what to do." Jasmine felt a familiar fire ignite in her chest. The Trevors of the world might have been exposed, but cruelty itself hadn't been defeated. It had just shifted, found new forms. New perpetrators. "What's your name?" Jasmine asked. "Rebecca." "Well, Rebecca, here's what you're going to do. Screenshot everything. Document every interaction. Build your case carefully and thoroughly. Then, when you have enough evidence, you expose them. Not with violence, not with cruelty, but with truth. But what if it doesn't work? What if they retaliate?" Jasmine smiled, thinking of all the students who'd found their voices this week. "Then you'll have an army behind you. We've learned that silence only protects the bullies. We speak up now. All of us." She spent the next hour with Rebecca, teaching her the basics of digital self-defense, sharing the lessons Malik had taught her. By the time they returned to the dance, Rebecca stood a little taller, fear replaced with determination. As prom night wound down, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the whirlwind of the past 2 weeks. She'd started as a girl trying to disappear, to survive until graduation. Now she was someone others looked to for strength, for guidance, for hope. But she knew this wasn't an end in it, was a beginning. The culture of a school, of a community, doesn't change overnight. There would be setbacks, new challenges, moments when the old patterns tried to reassert themselves, but something fundamental had shifted. The victims had found their voices, the bystanders had found their courage, and the bullies had learned that actions have consequences. As she walked home in the early morning hours, still wearing her grandmother's reimagined dress, Jasmine's phone buzzed with one final message. It was from Malik. "Proud of you, 'cause you didn't just get revenge. You started a revolution." She smiled, looking up at the stars, barely visible through the light pollution of suburban Connecticut. Somewhere out there, her grandmother was watching, proud that her dress had become something more than fabric and thread. It had become a symbol of transformation, of the power that comes from refusing to be broken. The dress that had been destroyed in malice had been reborn in defiance. And with it, so had Jasmine Washingtono, longer the shy girl from Detroit, but a young woman who'd learned that sometimes the quietest voices, when finally raised, can echo the loudest. Monday morning arrived with unprecedented changes at Westfield High. Where once designer logos and expensive cars had determined social hierarchy, now courage and kindness set the standard. Jasmine noticed it in small ways. The sophomore who used to eat alone now surrounded by friends. The freshman who'd been mocked for his secondhand clothes walking with confidence. The quiet kids finally feeling safe to be themselves. Principal Davidson had instituted morning assemblies focused on community building. Today's speaker was unexpected, Mr. Genny Bullies and Biles Williams, the janitor who'd helped Jasmine collect the pieces of her destroyed dress for 30 years. "I've cleaned these halls," he said, his voice carrying quiet authority. "I've seen generations of bullies come and go, always thinking they're different. Special, untouchable. But I've also seen the quiet ones, the strong ones, the ones who endure, and sometimes, just sometimes, I see someone who changes everything." Miss Washington didn't just stand up for herself. She stood up for every person who ever felt powerless in these halls. After the assembly, Jasmine found a package in her locker. Inside was a photo album, pictures from proms spanning decades, all featuring students wearing beautiful handmade dresses. A note was attached. "From the Westfield High Alumni Network. You're not the first to transform pain into power. Welcome to the sisterhood." As she flipped through the pages, Jasmine realized each photo had a story, girls who'd been mocked, excluded, bullied, but who'd refused to let cruelty define them. Some had become doctors, teachers, activists. All had carried the lessons learned in these halls into the wider world. The final page was blank, except for a message. "Your story here." Jasmine smiled, understanding that her revenge had become something far more powerful than she'd ever intended. She'd joined a legacy of women who'd refused to be broken, who'd turned their suffering into strength, who'd lit candles rather than curse the darkness. The revolution had indeed begun, and it would continue long after the last echo of her name faded from Westfield High's halls.